Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and my arrangement of bins is usually the oldest stuff ends up in the top left, and then I snake around and all my newer things are off to the right here. And among my newer systems are these 255-day-old African nightcrawler systems. Up until now, they've been fed 5 times, and my aim was to come in here to give them their 6th feeding. It's been 13 days since our last check-in with these. They got banana, they got cantaloupe, I think there was some lettuce in there, a number of things that I'm fairly sure are going to show very little, if any, signs of leftovers. Maybe banana peels. I think there was potato, maybe there's going to be some potato skins. I think they're due for a feeding, so I bought down some food from my freezer. I've set up my collection of prepared bedding to include with that feeding. I got my worm chow. I'm all set to go. So we're going to get these systems up on the bench, see how they're coming along, and give them their feeding today. So let's get to work. Unlike what you might have noticed when I was showing you the other bins on my shelves over there, other bins that many of which have either bubble wrap or a plastic bag covering, here we've opted to just go with a covering of newspaper, a single sheet of newspaper, which has been doing a pretty good job keeping the moisture in, although I think we just accept the fact that when we come in we're going to be faced with some pretty dry stuff on the top surface, stuff that's really going to show no signs of worm traffic because of its dryness. But typically it doesn't require you to dig very deep to start reaching a level that's damp enough to have worm activity and worm traffic. We definitely put a good amount of leaves on here. They're almost like its own little vapor barrier protection. And I'm debating whether I want to stick with paper coverings or possibly switch over to some plastic coverings, because I think by doing so it would also dampen all the stuff that's out on the top surface and trigger a bit more worm traffic throughout a bit more of the material in the system. This somehow to me does not appear as if it's an organic material. To me it somehow seems synthetic, so I'm pulling it out. I'm usually pretty careful about what I put into my systems, but things occasionally do slip through. I guess that's the time to nab it and pull it out right when you notice it. So I'm already starting to see a little bit of wriggling around here. No, they're not red wigglers, or red wrigglers. I don't even know the right pronunciation or the spelling, but I refer to them as wigglers. I think some people want to call them wrigglers, and that's fine by me. Either way, whatever you call them. Both of those names, I believe, apply to the same scientific name for the species. I think they've got other names too, depending on what region you live in or other things. I forget. I think if you look them up in Wikipedia, there's maybe 5 or 6 various names for them. Some of the names are definitely ones that I don't even hardly recognize. Other ones are pretty common, but I like to just call them red wigglers. This is something that's going to take the worms a good bit of time to break down. It's a stem of a pumpkin, and if I remember correctly, we had taken the other part of this stem, which was pretty long, and placed it into the other system, so they both have a chance to snack on pumpkin stem for the next year before it all gets whittled down to nothing. And that's probably my estimate for how long that will take to break down, which means it'll certainly outlive the expected time frame of a bin like this. I've been trying to run my bins a little bit longer now, but typically a bin this size will not run a whole year. I think 300 days has been sort of the upper end of how far I could take a system like this before it starts getting to the point where I feel like I need to harvest. And the harvesting is usually spurred on by me just running out of room in the system. I think I'm now remembering what we did here. It was not only potato peels, but I believe we actually had a rotted potato that I tried to split in half and give each system one of the halves. And I think that they're just in here slurping up the gooey, rotting potato. It's not really rotting. I believe it's another type of breakdown. I mean, ultimately, if bacteria and microbes and whatnot are breaking it down, I guess it's probably technically a form of rotting down, but luckily when it's in a worm bin, the types of bacteria and microbes and fungi and everything that help the worms break stuff down. Doesn't really emit any sort of an odor that would be considered indicative of rotting, as we're all accustomed to it. Somehow the breakdown process of materials in a worm bin produces this really nice kind of almost like a forest floor scent, you know. It just has this clean odor to it. It almost doesn't matter what you put in. You could pick up a piece of leftover banana, you could pick up a piece of corn, you could pick up a piece of potato, and after the life forms within the system start working it down, it all just sort of takes on this single common earthy smell, which is actually quite pleasant because it sort of reminds you of just walking out in the forest and smelling the nice fresh air. Unusually enough, that was probably one of the most surprising things for me when I started worm composting, was just how fresh and clean the whole thing seems as far as its odor. I mean, visually it doesn't look very clean or fresh. It just looks like a big pile of worm poo. But I guess that's the other nice thing about worm poo, is that it really does resemble just soil, dirt. So from that perspective, it also doesn't really have that gross feature to it like you would imagine if you're looking at any other sort of fecal matter from any other sort of creatures. This looks to me like some leftovers of the cantaloupe they were given. I believe cantaloupe was one of the things they were fed. Most of what they got recently looks to be gone, except those things that we know for sure are going to always take a good amount of time in a worm bin. A pumpkin stem, obviously, pretty much just a piece of wood, if you think about it. Corn cobs also take quite a bit of time to break down. It's part of the reason I started chopping them into little bits like this, to try to increase the overall surface area, kind of expose that cut end as additional surface area for the worms to be able to approach that food from all angles and work it down a little bit more quickly as a result of it being broken up into little bits. So I think we've created a good enough opening here to drop in today's feeding. I'm bringing in my prepared bedding. Since these are African night crawlers, they're pretty well known for almost preferring more carbon-based type foods like leaves and cardboard paper, things of that nature. And that's really what my mixed bedding consists of. I just throw leaves in here after I take the shredded paper and cardboard out of the shredder. Mix it all together, dampen it so everything kind of blends together nicely and doesn't go into the worm bin completely dry. So I'm going to see if I can separate some of these banana peels so that I can give some to this bin and save some for the other bin here too. I put another fresh corn cob in here, but we'll save this other one for the other bin. Here are some veggies that a soup was made with recently, stuff that my mom contributed. This is another piece of the same. So I'm just trying to be fair here in terms of divvying out the different types of foods that are in here, so that a little bit of this, a little bit of that gets added, but then a similar combination of stuff for them is saved for the other bin for when we get in there. It's so difficult for me, I don't know why, to evenly split a portion of food like this, but I'm starting to get the sense that we've pretty much taken half of what was in here out and given it here to bin number 1. So why don't we leave it at that. We sometimes add pulverized eggshell or perhaps rock dust, maybe just a little bit of clean sand. This is really intended to go in not so much as a food, but more as a helper, so that when the worms start feeding, they'll ingest some of that hard, coarse, minute material, such as in my case these crushed eggshells. And they'll be able to utilize that in their gizzards to help break stuff down, because they don't break stuff down the way you and I do with stomach acids. Theirs is a little bit more primitive in terms of how the foods they eat get ground down within their stomachs. It is actually physically ground down with these rough, fine materials such as eggshell, in my case, to crush down the foods that they're eating and digest it that way. So these guys are not happy about being out here in the light, so they've all kind of swarmed together into this little bundle. But they didn't want to leave their potato, it seems. They stayed put on the food, but we're going to give them a break now and start restoring the darkness that they prefer. So I think we've got a little bit more room remaining in here to just sprinkle in a little bit more of my prepared bedding right on top, just to cover up the food that they got here. And you know what? As long as I'm kind of winding down what they're going to be getting as far as their feeding, I'd also like to include a little bit of my worm chow. The worm chow is just a combination of various different things that I threw in the blender, tried to break it all down into a really fine consistency, almost like a powder. And that's something that the worms can definitely make use of. Nice bite-sized food for them. I'm going to dampen the worm chow too a little bit here. I'm not complaining about the moisture level of the material here in the system, not at all. In fact, I think things are really nice in here. I guess that top covering of leaves really did a good job sort of suppressing any sort of evaporation that might have occurred otherwise. So why don't we begin just kind of covering up the feeding zone with some of these nice castings that are starting to develop here. It's obviously not pure castings yet. 55-day-old bin is going to start showing signs of nice amounts of castings piling up, but you're also going to find good amounts of residual bedding scraps and maybe food bits and other things mixed in. In time, it'll all get eaten up and converted into worm castings, but right now it's still kind of a mix. But I must say, it is definitely making nice progress. I want to just take a peek on the two far edges away from where we've been feeding lately down the middle, just to make sure things out there are kind of stable and comfortable too, make sure nothing is happening out there that needs our attention. I guess drying would be my main concern out there, since the application of the frozen foods is going down the middle where, you know, that stuff thaws, emits some moisture, the worm activity, everything. Just want to make sure the outer edges are holding up well too. Usually when I'm in there looking at the outer edges, that's my opportunity. If I find a good concentration of castings down there to mix in some of the residual bedding that's floating around within the system. Somehow I always do find a good bit of casting material out here on the edges, and I believe that's just because in systems like this where we're feeding down the middle, you know, I do have a tendency to, you know, open up the crevice down the middle and then push all the existing material that's already getting worked pretty well out to the edges. So since it's predominantly castings anymore out on the edges, I also like to include a little bit of this bedding as a nice little way to mix it up for them. Alright, things are looking good in here. I was debating whether we'd be putting plastic on here or not, and I think we're not. I think we're just going to ride it out the way it is because the moisture levels are holding up pretty good. My furnace has been turned on and has been heating now for at least a week, I think. And all the windows are closed, so even if it's nice and humid outside, it's not helping inside. The air in here does generally start to dry out once the furnace starts blowing. So I do need to begin adapting to the potential of, you know, the system's potentially losing some of their moisture to evaporation. So I guess another thing we could do here is, this is really almost useless because the moisture on this piece of paper will probably evaporate by the time I'm editing this video. If I were to come down here in a couple hours, this will probably be dry already, but whatever. I think we're in good shape here. Let's go get the other bin and get them fed too. All right, here we go. Okay, let's see. Here, same story for the most part. And I suppose that is by design, you know. I do want to sometimes run systems in tandem like this so that I can use them as sort of a way to compare one system to the other. If I see something going awry in one but not in the other, then I know that something's, you know, specific to that system that I need to focus on. But I guess once I'm done feeding the first system in pairs like this, I sort of know what to expect in the next system since they're managed very similarly to one another. So here too, I was sort of expecting to find a pretty nice batch of material right below this top covering of leaves, which was pretty generously applied last time. And things look pretty good already. I'm already starting to see some activity down here. Some of the worms just hanging out right above where we last fed. I'm curious to see if we've got that other half of potato over here with a similar turnout going on. Let's start checking out how that last feeding is holding up. Again, we're going to start bumping into similar foods as we found as leftovers in the other bin. Corn cobs, good number of them. All of them getting a fair bit of attention from the worms. And despite that good amount of activity that you see on corn cobs, it does take them a good bit of time to work it down. So even though you would think that, a piece of food that's covered in worms is going to be gone in no time, these corn cobs are going to last for weeks and weeks before they finally break down. Sometimes I find that they do break down a lot more quickly as little bits, and that's the reason I've chopped them up that way, but not always. It was, I'm sorry, I'm just getting a little distracted. I do know that there was banana, and just from the appearance of the banana skin here, I'm almost wondering was it really potato that we had in that other bin that had that little remaining skin and worms all over it. I mean, here we're not seeing that kind of worm turnout, but it makes me question whether what we saw there was maybe a leftover piece of banana and not potato. I knew that I had taken a rotting potato and cut it in half and put it into a pair of bins like this, but this might not be where we did that. This could actually be, could be banana, so I don't know. That's the funny thing about by feeding your worms sometimes, is that it's often very difficult to tell what it is that you're bumping into as far as leftovers go. So I guess one thing I'm still expecting to run into is that other half of the pumpkin stem. Here's more cantaloupe rinds, which appear to have been stripped more or less clean of all the fresh melon. So for whatever reason, we're bumping into a little worm party over here. I'm not sure what they're nibbling on, but it does look like something that's got a good bit of fibrous content to it. Who knows? They're doing a good job, though. It's weird, I just caught a whiff of something really interesting, like some sort of a leftover piece of food or something. Not a foul odor, just kind of an interesting, maybe fruity odor. And this is that other piece of pumpkin stem that I made reference to earlier. That's going to take us a long time. That thing's going to be around for months and months and months. So some of the other leftovers I'm spotting here are more of those pieces of corncob bits, most of which at this point have had their middle sections nibbled out, because that stuff's a little bit softer and more moist than the rest of the material. But they'll just keep going at it. They'll whittle away what they can out of the quick breakdown bits, and once they do away with that, they'll just continue and do away with the rest. So let's kind of follow suit here. Let's give them a nice wide opening into which we could plop today's feeding. Okay, I think we've given them a pretty decent size crevice to drop today's food into. So once again, I'm grabbing a handful of my prepared bedding here, onto which we can start piling in the food. I think last time we piled in the fresh stuff and then went in with the leftovers. Here we can switch that around a little bit. It's not important for us to be 100% in sync with what we did in the other system. I just like the idea of, maintaining consistency in the amounts of food, the types of food, the types of coverings, the moisture levels. Try to keep that harmonized if possible. And just the basic assortment of bedding and grit and chow and other things that we're putting in for them. This is where we get to see how good we did on trying to evenly divvy up the feeding. It's hard to say. I think we did a pretty good job. sometimes I feel like the second system somehow benefits because I'm attempting to hang on to enough of the stuff when I'm applying it into the first bin to make sure we're giving the second bin a equal amount. But somehow in that attempt to keep things equal, I feel like I sometimes do leave a little bit more for the second system than what was given to the first system. Alright, I think we're almost there as far as applying their feeding in a consistent way. Now, this moisture that I'm applying, the squirt bottle, it's not just straight water. This stuff also has that mosquito dunks in it, which is meant to help control the flying insects. And in some of my newer systems like these, I just want to make sure I've been applying this stuff pretty regularly to not allow little flying insects to move in and colonize the the system. So we'll do the same as we did on the other one too, is we'll dampen that top covering of newspaper, and even after the water that the BTI is in evaporates, the bacteria will hopefully, you know, get introduced down into the system and start making its way down and treating the material to make it impossible for the flying insects to keep, you know, propagating. It won't kill the insects outright. In fact, it won't even prevent them from mating or laying their eggs, but it's the larva that comes out of their eggs that gets, I guess, prevented from progressing further. So it'll, you know, it'll try to transform, or maybe not ever get to that point where it can transform into a fly. And that's just pretty much where its life cycle will end. It'll be unable to transform into that final stage of a mature fruit fly that can continue on. So it's not an immediate thing. It takes a little bit of time for it to eventually not permit that next generation to come around and propagate. So it does take a little while for its effects to be seen throughout all the different systems that are getting it applied. And for a while I was putting it in all my systems. Eventually I did away with all the flying insects in all my systems, and then when it ran out I just didn't bother making more. But more recently, some of my newer systems, I've been spotting some flying insects here and there. So I whipped up a new batch, and I've been trying to remember to apply it to most of my systems, especially the younger ones that didn't get any from that first go around of me introducing this stuff to my arsenal of worm feeding and maintenance things. So now I'm pretty sure we've done a consistent job on setting up both of these bins with their feedings. So let's just not forget to get this BTI solution in here. Luckily in here I'm not really seeing too much flying insect activity, but here and there in some of my other newer systems I've been spotting them. So even with my forgetful nature, once in a while I'll forget to apply this stuff, but over time hopefully I'll manage to get every system up and running with a sufficient quantity of BTI bacteria living in the material, which will ultimately stifle any sort of ongoing propagation of the flying insects that are such pests. So annoying, right? Alright everyone, that's it. We're done feeding our 55-day-old African nightcrawler systems. The systems are doing really good. A little bit unusual for me to have systems that are so loaded with so much material, so close to the rim already, not even 2 months old. But that's been sort of my theme. I've been wanting to go lots and lots of bedding in all my systems. Try to increase the volume of the material in the system so that the worms can sense that as, you know, a large area to move into and to propagate into. So hopefully it'll trigger some breeding and some expansion of the population in here. So we'll see. Hopefully that works. All right, everyone. Got a couple things I got to clean up and put away before I can call it a day. But I'm not going to keep you around for that. Before I go though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.